Chapter 42. Bancroft House, Somerset, England, June 26th, 1889. Finding a carriage to Bancroft House had been hell. This wasn't particularly noticeable to Strawberry. It felt as if her entire life had been hell in the recent months. The house was an isolated property in the countryside surrounded by fields and forests. With the exception of a single village, there was nowhere for several miles in any direction, and it certainly didn't help that all the people in said village refused to approach the home. Mambu strode into the town pub, rain dripping from her ruined dress as the warm air and stale scent of beer slammed into her. She ignored the strange looks and comments of the patrons gathered around her as she approached the bar, trying to keep her composure as best she could. "I need a carriage," she stated flatly to the man behind the bar, who blinked up at her from hazy red eyes. It wasn't hard to realize he had been helping himself to quite a few drinks alongside his patrons. "Well, I haven't got one," he said. It gathered a few laughs from some of the men at the bar, although the barman didn't necessarily say it to be funny. He was simply still trying to wrap his fuzzy mind around their request. Mambu sighed. "Well, yes, I can see that, but I assume you know where I can get one?" "Oh, yeah, stables, Eddie." The man behind the bar shook his head, hoping to make the fuzziness go away, but only seeming to make it worse. "Edwards!" the man yelled. "Eddie, you got a woman here." There was an audible groan from across the room, and Strawberry wasn't sure if the sound came from the chair being pushed back across the floor, or the man sitting in it. The man, Edwards, she presumed, stretched as he approached, his heavy footfalls leaving muddy tracks along the floor. By now, much of the pub had gone back to their own conversations, losing interest in the newly arrived stranger, although a few of the patrons kept their eyes on Mambu as the short man addressed her. "Ma'am," he said, rolling his shoulders. "You're Mr. Edwards, I presume?" Strawberry asked, looking ever so slightly down at him. He nodded. "Indeed? You need a carriage?" "Yes, you see, it's outside my hours, it'll cost you extra." "Yes, that's a fine. Price is not an issue. I just need—" "You're right, Mum. You look as if you've been crying, if that ain't just the rain. How about I buy you a drink and we dry you off before we get going? I don't want to get in my carriage all wet." Strawberry stomped her foot in a gesture that she would have deemed rather childish if she hadn't been driven to the end of her rope over these last few days. Everything had fallen apart, and now she was so close to finding answers, and was being delayed purely by the drunken incompetence of this sleepy town. "I do not want a bloody drink. I want a goddamn carriage to Bancroft House, and I want to leave immediately." The casual look in Mr. Edwards' eyes hardened to a steely glare. His jaw shifted as he rolled his response around in his mouth for a moment before speaking. "I'm not taking no one to Bancroft House," he said flatly. "You'll have to find someone else." Strawberry blinked at him. "Excuse me." Edwards turned back to his seat. "I said no, Mum." Mambu reached out and grabbed his arm. No, you don't understand. I know it's far, but I said money isn't... "It's not about the money, miss," Edwards chuckled. It was a humorless chuckle, covering something cold and dry in his voice. Anger, maybe. Mambu wasn't entirely sure. "Then what is it? Why won't you—" "The horses won't go there," Edwards said quietly. He tugged softly his arm, but Strawberry held firm. She noticed now that the pub had gone silent once again, and all eyes were turned on the pair. She swallowed. "What do you mean?" "No animals will." Edwards just shook his head. "Horses won't go near the place. Good reason." "That's ridiculous," Mambu laughed. Unlike Mr. Edwards' laugh, hers covered nothing. It let all of her unhinged desperation leak into the room. She had read Jamie's letter and the list of properties. She knew there was nowhere else for Easton and Sherbet to be. It had to be Bancroft House. She couldn't stop here. "My child is there. I need to—" "Nobody's there," a man laughed from a table nearby. "Except the devil, maybe." Mambu turned to look at this other man, her nails still digging into Edward's sleeve. "What does that mean?" "It means the place is cursed," the barman sighed, leaning on the counter in front of him. He had decided to take another sip of beer, which didn't in any way help with the fuzziness in his head, but it did make him feel more comfortable with it, which was all that mattered to him. "Always has been." Fairies, some folks say. There's no such thing as bloody fairies, Mac, the man at the table spat. It's ghosts, that's what it is. Demons and the like. I heard the devil holds his parties there, on the solstices. Someone else, a woman this time, piped up from a different table. That's why there's been all that screaming on the wind since midsummer. And the fires, the man at the table agreed, taking another long sip of his drink. In the windows and the grounds. The fire that doesn't burn nothing down. Richard swears he saw a skeleton there a few days back, the barman said. There's a walk straight through the front gate, not a shred of skin on it, old rotted bones and ragged clothes. Richard's full of shit, the man at the table scoffed. Will you shut up? Strawberry yelled. This is all nonsense. There are no such things as fairies or ghosts or the devil. She turned back to Edwards. Will you take me there or not? No, he said flatly. Mumbu realized what his laugh had been hiding. It wasn't anger or malice. It was fear. He was afraid of the house. Like I said, animals won't even go near it. Even the birds are quiet in those woods. Nothing goes there. It's the ground, the man at the table shrugged. Cursed, I reckon. Evil place. Rotten, corrupted earth. Mumbu ignored him. If you won't take me, then who else will? Edward struggled to free his arm and retreat from the frantic gaze of this apparent madwoman. No one will. I'm the only one with a cab in this town. If you want to get there so badly, walk there, but I'm not responsible for whatever happens to you if you do. This is madness, Strawberry shouted, finally releasing Mr. Edwards, who stumbled back into a table and was helped upright by its occupants. Look who's talking, the woman muttered, which received a few snickers. Strawberry's face went almost as red as her hair, but she kept her blue eyes focused on Edwards. Sell me a horse. Excuse me? Sell me, Mumbu said, as calmly as she could manage. A horse. I will buy one from you and ride it there myself. That's not how it works. Even if it did, the mayor wouldn't... I don't care about your cursed fucking ground, Strawberry seethed. Name your price, and I will take whichever horse you give me. If it doesn't go near the house, it will be my business, not yours. And so it was that less than an hour later, Mumbu found herself slowly trudging through the countryside on the back of a newly acquired horse. The animal, Raspberry, Mumbu was told, a name so similar to her own she refused to see it as anything but a good omen, was incredibly unhappy about the conditions it was being ridden in. For the most part, Raspberry had led a seemingly simple life, sharing the load of a small single-person carriage among several other horses, where she enjoyed strolls through pleasant evening weather when drunk villagers were too inebriated to find their home. Now, however, the horse was burdened with a saddle and her own rider, and was being ridden through the muddy fields of Somerset on a truly miserable night, the moon rising steadily overhead. What was worse for Raspberry, however, was that she could smell it. Even from this far away, she was able to sense it. The animal could smell something foul, something entirely wrong on the horizon. Its own instincts would have been to turn the other way, but her new rider pushed onwards towards the ominously dark tree line ahead. Strawberry yelled in frustration as the horse reared and bucked against her directions midway through the forest. The horse whinnied and screamed, skittering along on its hooves and threatening to buck its rider off before they pressed any further. It was too close. Far too close. Raspberry shook her head violently, and Mumbu saw thick drops of blood fall to the dirt path, shining and ghastly in the light of the lantern which hung from the horse's saddle. Eventually she stepped down from the animal and wrestled with its reins as it tried to bolt. She barely managed to tie Raspberry to a tree before the animal broke loose, and she checked for a long time that the knots would hold. Mumbu had paid for the horse. She wasn't going to let it run away. They felt a twinge of guilt at forcing the animal to move so far down the path against its will. She had spent her life caring for and raising animals, and to see one in such pain and distress was as painful for her. Strawberry spent a considerable amount of time stroking the horse's nose and petting its flanks in an attempt to calm her down. She even managed to wipe away the blood streaming from both of the horse's nostrils once it finally settled. The moon was high overhead now, and the rain had settled into a light mist. Beyond the heavy breathing of herself and the horse, the night was deathly silent. No night birds called in the thick canopy of trees above them. No animals shuffled through the undergrowth shrubbery which spread through the roughly worn path. Strawberry looked down at the path, peering through the gloom, rain gathering on her eyelashes and dripping from her nose. She could see the house properly now. They had been there once before, when Easton had first bought the derelict and abandoned property. The roof which peeked out over the overgrown hedges was dark and ominous. The pointed spire stretched upwards into the night, and a weathervane spun lazily atop it, silhouetted against the moon. Mumbu set out on foot, leaving Raspberry behind as they trudged down the path, letting the mud soak into the hem of their already ruined dress as it caught on the grass and sticks. Hope swelled in Strawberry's chest as she got closer. There were lights in the house's windows. The curtains were drawn, but the unmistakable flickering of firelight pressed against the moth-eaten fabric. She approached the hedge, sticking close to it as she neared the entrance to the grounds. Mumbu ran her hands across the leaves as they walked and let out a soft curse as a thorn sliced open the pad of their finger. Her blood was dark and inky in the shadow of the moonlight. Her feet ached as she traced her way down the overgrown path. She kept her eyes on the house ahead. Mumbu paused, taking a moment to lean against a large tree as she breathed. Her clothes had stuck to her back with sweat and rain as she pulled red hair from her face and wrung it out over her shoulder. A click echoed across the grounds, and Strawberry looked up with a start to see a silhouette slip from the doorway. It wasn't Easton, or Sherbet, or even David. In fact, in the darkness, Mumbu couldn't recognize the thin, pale figure at all. They ducked behind a tree, their heart thumping in their chest. Had she made a mistake? What if they weren't here after all? But if not them, who else? Mumbu leaned around the tree trunk and squinted through the mist at... Haley? She pulled back into her hiding spot, more out of shock than fear. It was Haley. What was Haley doing here? All this time, Strawberry had thought something terrible had happened to her friend, and yet she was here. Why hadn't Haley said anything? Strawberry peered back at the house and the stumbling figure of the woman as Haley trekked across the grounds. She was limping quite badly, and Mumbu squinted to try and see why. Haley's clothes, still the same from the night she went missing in London, were ripped and tattered, and her hair was tangled and wild. Strawberry for a moment wondered if Haley had seen her coming and was running to greet her. But Haley wasn't running towards her. She was running away from the house. Strawberry was about to step out to greet Haley when... Crack! Mumbu stifled a scream, clamping a hand over their mouth as they watched Haley fall, the woman's screech of pain breaking the night silence. Blood sprayed from Haley's shoulder in a dark cloud amidst the light rain. Strawberry managed to tear her eyes away from the crawling, desperate form of Haley to follow the trajectory of the bullet. She flinched as another shot went off, missing Haley by only a few feet. And there, striding across the ground, the blood streaking down their face, glistening silver in the moonlight, was Sherbet. Tears were streaming down Strawberry's cheeks before she'd even truly processed what was happening. Sherbet kicked Haley over as she screamed, and Mumbu saw them closer now, a twisted portrait of a valiant explorer, their foot braced not on a rock or founding stone, but instead digging into the chest of their screaming victim. The side of their face was covered in their own uncleaned blood, and the rage of their expression made the reaching black and purple veins under their skin writhe and dance with excitement. Strawberry had to force herself to not vomit upon seeing her lover like that, rotting away from the inside. Her ears were still ringing from the sounds of the gunshots, and she missed the words Sherbet said as they gently caressed Haley's face and stepped off her. The grip on Strawberry's chest lightened ever so slightly, and then... crack! She watched Haley go limp on the ground. He watched the blood splatter across Sherbet, coating their already bloody face and covering their white shirt with spots and streaks of red. She watched smoke curl from the barrel of Sherbet's gun, rising lazily into the night sky. And she watched as Sherbet, after surveying their work proudly, turned around and strode back to the house, leaving Haley's lifeless body on the ground. It was only when Sherbet was inside and out of sight that Mumbu released a sob, turned back behind her tree, and vomited violently into the grass. Her trembling hand gripped the gnarled trunk as she fought to keep herself upright, and the tears streamed down her face. It was a long time before she turned back and saw Haley, still there, still unmoving, still dead. Strawberry took a shaky step into the open, half expecting to be shot herself. Nothing came. No Sherbet. No gunshot. Part of them wished the shot had come, that she had been killed. A bullet would have been easier pain to bear than this. They stumbled to their knees beside Haley and had to resist the urge to throw up again as they saw the blood pooling from the wounds in Haley's back and the chunks of missing flesh that had been blown clear of her body. Mumbu rolled her friend over gently. Haley was heavy and limp, and her eyes stared glassily up at the stars overhead, drained of colour in the grey light of the moon. "No," Mumbu whispered. They pulled Haley towards them, looking down into her blank, pained face as her blood seeped into their dress, the last remnants of Haley's life soaking into their legs and stomach as they cradled their friend, whispering sweet denials into her unlistening ears. "Please. Please, no, Haley, Haley, please." Mumbu's voice was raw and scraping. She pulled Haley's face into her shoulder and felt Haley's own tears, cold and drying, wipe across her jaw. Strawberry couldn't bring herself to cry out. She didn't have the energy or the breath. And so the only sound which escaped her lips as she rocked Haley's body back and forth was a soft, lingering whimper. They weren't listening to the empty grounds anymore. She didn't care if Sherbet came back. They didn't know if they could care about anything anymore. Their purpose had been to find Sherbet, and they had. Was it worth it? Was knowledge worth this? There was a metallic clicking sound, and Strawberry waited for the crack of another shot to echo across the grounds. She closed her eyes and waited for the bullet to hit her as the gun was cocked. "Good evening, Miss Pine." Strawberry paused, weaving her tear-filled eyes to look up at the person who had spoken. Only it wasn't a person. Not exactly. Seven did not shine in the moonlight. He was far too ancient for that, and shining was a skill his rusted and tarnished body had long since forgotten. Instead, the light of the moon avoided them altogether, seeping into the shadows of their sculpted face, distinguishable only by the flickering blue glow of his eyes. Rain began to soak into the ill-fitting clothes and collect on his metallic surfaces, reminding it ever so gently of how it was supposed to glint in the night. Mumbu swallowed another sob, looking at the ground by Seven's feet. "Are you going to kill me?" Seven tilted his head. "No, Miss Pine. I am not going to kill you." "Is Sherbet?" "No, I do not believe so. Dr. Quigson has indicated no awareness of your presence." "So then why are you here?" Strawberry spat. Seven knelt down and offered out their arms. A sheet was draped across them, prepared to wrap Haley's body in. "I have been instructed to remove the body of Miss Garfield." Mumbu hugged Haley tighter to her chest. "No." "No?" Seven asked. He was not expecting Strawberry to oppose his task. He was not expecting her to be here at all. It complicated things greatly. "You can't just... I won't let you take her." Seven kept his arms extended, expecting Mumbu would place Haley in them sooner or later. You do not wish me to properly care for the deceased. Mumbu shuddered with another sob, hearing Haley referred to as the deceased. What are you going to do with her? This was a question Seven had been thinking about ever since Dr. Quakeson had given them their task. This was an altogether unpleasant experience, as Seven was not used to thinking at all, and thinking about such an intense situation rather than simply following orders required a level of engagement which made him uncomfortable. It made him uncomfortable to be uncomfortable, as he wasn't entirely used to that either. I don't care what you do. Take it somewhere, anywhere. Just as long as it's not here. Get rid of her. Dr. Quickson's words played over in their mind. Seven did not know many places, and so he had chosen one which he felt would be the most appropriate, where he could potentially be given better instructions. I am going to take her to a location, Seven said. What location? That information is classified. Mumbu bent over, still holding Haley close. I won't let you hurt her anymore. I won't let anyone hurt her. Seven realized it was impossible for Miss Garfield to be hurt at all anymore. However, he felt that this was perhaps not an appropriate thing to say. I will take care of the deceased appropriately. Her name is Haley, Strawberry screamed at them, before shrinking back into herself and glancing fearfully at Bancroft House, afraid someone had heard her. I apologize, Seven nodded. If it would encourage your confidence, I can assure you that I will take Haley to a place where she can be buried properly. A place also classified to Dr. Quickson. You can't just tell me where, Mumbu whispered. That information is classified. Seven nodded again. He thought for a moment, his mechanics churning. However, you would be welcome to accompany me, should you wish to verify the safety of the location. Strawberry looked at the metal man. There was no emotion on his blank face. She didn't want to hand Haley over yet. But what else was she going to do? She couldn't carry her out of here by herself. If she stayed, Sherbert would find her, and she would be killed or left in a worse state than Haley had been. If she left, no one would come back with her. The locals would never come near the place to retrieve Haley. Maybe this house was cursed, after all. Promise me you'll take care of her, Mumbu asked. Seven nodded. His neck clicked as he did so. I promise, Miss Pine. Strawberry slowly laid Haley down in Seven's arms, blood immediately spreading to stain the white sheet with patches of crimson. The automaton held her weight effortlessly. Mumbu reached out and used her sleeve to wipe the drying tears from Haley's face. She closed the woman's eyes and bent down to leave a single kiss on her forehead. Then they watched as Seven wrapped Haley in the sheet and her face was hidden from the world. Mumbu looked at her friend for the last time and truly lost her forever. She watched as Seven stood up. He took 2 steps past her and then paused. Are you going to accompany me, Miss Pine? He asked. Seven was still not used to wanting things, but he did, he realized, want her to come. I believe it would be beneficial. Mumbu turned to look at them. Is this a trap? She wiped away her own tears as best she could. I have not been given the task of trapping you. Mumbu took a deep breath and pulled herself shakily to her feet, leaning her weight on Seven's unmoving shoulder. I suppose. She looked back at Bancroft House, the place she had come so far for, searched for so desperately as a place of hope, which now only held death and pain in her mind. She didn't want to see the people inside if they had become like Sherbet. She couldn't see Easton like that. There's nothing else for me to do here now. Seven nodded and began walking at a slower pace, allowing the woman to follow him as he made his way beyond the property and into the vastness of the countryside.